Hello and welcome to another episode of The Distinguished Geek. So last year it was all about the war on the newsstands. This year it's about conquering them. This is 1952. So in December 1951, Timely Productions became Atlas, the new name of what we now know as Marvel. But in 1952, nobody knew at the time that it would prove to be Atlas's best sustained growth. Martin Goodman, the publisher of Atlas, was now in control of his own distribution. There was no middleman determining how many titles to be released. Martin Goodman increased production and flooded the market with almost 400 releases over the year, an all-time high that would not be seen again until the 1990s, when there was an explosion of consumers trying to invest in what everyone in the comic world saw as collectibles. It caused a high amount of additional titles to be published. Atlas pioneered its way onto the newsstands, leaving a strong and lasting presence, purely through high numbers rather than reader loyalty. Now, Atlas wasn't everyone's favourite comic book company. However, practically anyone reading a comic book back in 1952 was reading an Atlas comic. Now, these comics would be disbanded and cancelled over a few issues, but nonetheless, this kind of bombardment allowed Atlas to flourish. In January, the Korean War was still providing material and was great for business. Atlas launched several new titles in an attempt to gain dominant position in the market. So in January, Atlas released War Adventures. In February, they released Battle Action. And in March, they released War Combat. Battlefield, Men in Action and War Action in April. And Battlefront and Combat in June. Now, these comics didn't feature permanent characters. They contained a compilation of one-off war stories. Now, this quantum amount of comics being released allowed Atlas to create a repetition of themes and focusing on the simple view of war on the battlefield and making it seem like a game. Now, from this, the titles Spy Cases and Spy Fighters jumped on the bandwagon. With stories of American undercover agents outsmarting the not-so-clever and corrupt communists. Now, these comics were released every 2 months to allow them to sell through the remaining copies, keeping Atlas at top of the ranks and selling out at every store. Venus Comics was struggling. Now, Martin Goodman was always ready to cancel a comic if there was any signs that the sales were dropping, but sometimes there was a comic that escaped cancellation by adapting to the current trends to survive. Venus was one of these comics. Now, Venus starred the Greek goddess of Venus, who travelled from the heavens and fell in love with the publisher of beauty magazine, Whitney Hammond. Now, Venus worked at this magazine company as a model, and her colleagues had no idea that she was a mythological goddess. Now, this life stayed the same within the comics, but her adventures and stories changed extremely. Venus debuted in 1948 to appeal to girls, a new audience back in 1948. Now, other comics that starred heroines that were released the same year was Sun Girl and Nomura, but both had speedily disappeared. Venus survived purely by adapting to the current trends. And the first one was it adopted the teen comedy craze. Then it transitioned into a romance comic, and a few issues later it became a fantasy and science fiction series. By the 13th issue, Bill Everett, the creator of The Submariner, took over the series and pulled out all the stops and created it into a shock horror series. Unfortunately, all the changes and the adapting to current trends merely suppressed its inevitable doom, and it was cancelled a few months later in April 1952. In June, Journey into Mystery issue number 1 was released. Now, looking through Atlas's catalogue and history of titles, Journey into Mystery, the first issue, was the most important comic to be released in 1952, practically identical to Strange Tales and Mystic Journey. It survived almost to the end of the Atlas era in 1957 when it changed into Marvel. Then transitioned into The Mighty Thor in August 1962, and then was retitled Thor in March 1966. Where it continues with its name to the present day. So last week's question was, what did the Ampex Corporation develop in 1951? And the correct answer is the videotape recorder. So well done to Chris Jones once again, so thank you very much. Right, so this week's question is, what did Kirsch Beverages first to do in 1952? If you just leave the correct answer in the comments, and I'll feature your name in next week's episode. Right, a bit of a shorter episode this week, but as always, thank you very much for watching. Please leave a comment and let me know how you felt this episode was. And as always, please like, share and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Thank you guys, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
The